Hello class and welcome to week 4. Hard to believe we're almost halfway done with the class, but wanted to talk a little bit about plant physiology, how plants grow, how you might be able to plant them, and an effort to get the process of growing a plant for plant wellness off the ground. We're going to start with some basics about the plant, how plants are identified, the tissues in plants. Then we'll get into a variety of different physiological things, what leads to flowering, what leads to different types of growth, and the like. So it should be pretty interesting, and hopefully you'll learn something about plant biology along the way. So the first thing that we're going to talk about are plant meristems. Meristems, the stem makes you think about stem cells, and that's right. These are undifferentiated cells that lead to growth. That could lead to a growth in height, like the apical meristems, which are found in the root and top of the plant. Or you could also have ones that see growth outward, like when we're thinking about the rings of a tree after a plant grows wider and wider each year. Those are from meristem tissues as well. But once those cells are created, those undifferentiated cells are created, they generally fall into 3 different types of category. The epidermal cells, which are the outer protective coating of the plant, the vascular, that transports systems within the plant, and then all of the material that's kind of holding the plant together, which is the ground tissue. In terms of epidermis, of course, there are cells all over the outside of the plant. Often when you feel them, they'll have a waxy feel. That's because they have an outer layer of wax, which is also to help result in it losing less water. But no matter where you look on the plant, the root, or the stem, there are always this outer layer of cells protecting the plant. One place that you see specialized cells within the epidermis are the stomata, which are little openings, little mouths on the bottom side of leaves, which are used for exchanging gases. Of course, plants need carbon dioxide to photosynthesize, and they release oxygen, so the plants need a way to get those gases into and out of their cells and into and out of their plant bodies. And those stoma or stomata are the areas where that occurs, those gaps, those small openings in the plant leaves. Ground tissue, of course, can provide a variety of different things, including storage, the weight or the structure of the plant. Of course, these are often photosynthetic cells, like the main cells that make up the leaf, for instance. And then, of course, there's the vascular tissue. You may remember from an earlier class talking about the xylem and the phloem. The xylem, of course, transports water into the plant, and it is kind of a unidirectional movement from the roots of the plant all the way up to the leaves. The other main ingredient or reactant in photosynthesis is, of course, water, and so that is required as part of the whole process, and that has to get up to the plant itself. The phloem, on the other hand, is responsible for moving sugars and other inorganic and organic compounds different places within the plant. And during the growing season, the phloem is, of course, sending material from the leaves, like sugars from the leaves, to other places for storage. But in the spring, you will see, of course, the phloem takes that material from the storage, maybe in the roots, and sends it up the plant into the leaves where they are needed to grow. Of course, we tap into that phloem. If you've ever tapped a maple tree, you know that you can put the spigot in there and you're capturing that sugary water coming from the roots, heading up the plant, and collecting it, boiling it off, and making maple syrup. So here's a look at the two main cells that make up the xylem, the vessels and the tracheids. What's interesting is that at a maturity, these cells are dead. So the plant basically, it's almost like a straw, and the plant draws water up by releasing water through the stoma or the stomata. The water gets slurped up almost like a straw. The phloem, on the other hand, is actually alive, but they have these companion cells to maintain the metabolic functioning of the plant cells while supporting these. Sugars would flow either one way or the other depending upon the time of year. And again, they are still alive, but largely empty, supported by these companion cells. Another thing you might remember from early days in science class, the difference between monocots and dicots. We actually now call them monocots and eudicots. That's a more formal term here in college. The cotyledons are embryonic leaves, and these refer to simply whether there is one embryonic leaf or two embryonic leaves in the seeds. You can see that a lot of monocots are in fact important for food, corn, rice, wheat, and the like. Relatively few of the types of plants that we're going to be looking at in general are monocots. In general, we are going to be spending time with a much greater percentage of eucots or eucotyledons with two embryonic leaves in the seed. There are all sorts of differences between the monocots and the dicots, not just in terms of the number of cotyledons. You look at the way the vascular bundles are held in the plant in various different parts of the plant, such as the root or stem. You can look at the number of petals on the flower and the like. And these are consistent differences. But these are like basically the two main important types of flowering plants out there. Of course, another fundamental important part of plant life is plant nutrition. Most of the organic material that they're making is through photosynthesis, of course, so they need carbon dioxide and water for that. But there are a number of other nutrients, essential elements, that they really require in order to survive. And what you can see here is, of course, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, sulfur, calcium, iron, magnesium, boron, manganese, copper, zinc, chloride, and molybdenum. And these are all nutrients that are required for function. Of course, the first couple make up the large majority of the organic material in the plant. But any of these macro or micronutrients will actually cause changes to the plant. And if you're growing plants, there is a whole host of research that has been done about how to determine whether your plants are not actually receiving all the nutrients that they need. And maybe if you need to supplement your soil with a certain nutrient in order to help the plant grow better. One example of this is nitrogen deficiency. These plants are the same age, but the one on the left has this yellowy outline of the leaves. The leaves are small, the stem is small. It is not a very good plant compared to the one on the right. So this is a case where they've grown it with and without nitrogen, and you can see the difference in the overall plant growth. And if you're looking for herbs or material from the stems or the leaves of the plant, you want to ensure that you get as much of that as possible. And of course, ensuring that you have the proper nutrition for your plants is a huge component of that. Some roots have interesting adaptations, mutualistic relationships, that things living close by. One important component is the idea that certain types of plants, many in the clover family, many, soybeans are a good example. They have nitrogen-fixing bacteria form in nodules next to the root. And so the bacteria actually change our atmospheric nitrogen, which is generally a high percentage of the atmosphere, into nitrate or ammonium, sources that are then available to the plant. The second major type of symbiotic relationship that you can find in plants is with mycorrhizae. These are fungal symbionts that live outside of the plant and in and around the roots, and they basically break down organic matter and make those inorganic nutrients available to the plant. So there is a mutualism here. The fungus gets something out of it too, but it is important. And again, you can find all sorts of examples online, pictures of plants being grown with or without mycorrhizae. We've also learned a tremendous amount about plant hormones and the chemicals that are found within plants and what impact they have on the plants. The ones we'll talk about include auxins, gibberellins, abscisic acid, and ethylene. So auxins are involved with things like phototropism. Auxins themselves lead to cell elongation and allows them to actually move, in this case, towards the light. With phototropism, you can see that the lit side, the auxins actually travel away from the light, causing these cells along the outside of the plant to become longer, and that pushes the stem of the plant more towards the light. There are, of course, a number of other types of tropisms too that we will maybe touch upon. Auxins are also important for apical dominance. It is produced in all of the different buds, and the ratios of auxins from the terminal bud at the top versus the lateral bud at the end or on the branches will determine what kind of growth it has. There's a famous saying in plant horticulture: if you cut off the head, the arms will grow, and if you cut off the arms, the head will grow. And basically what that means is if you cut off the terminal bud, like you did here, you can see what happens is the lateral buds will actually grow more because of the ratio of auxin from the terminal bud and the lateral buds. So you cut off the head and the arms will grow. But if you cut off all of the lateral buds, you will see the terminal bud will take off and grow a lot taller. So if you cut off the arms, the head will grow. This is also the case. Auxin is also used in root stimulation. If you've ever been planting a plant and you have a little jar of something that's supposed to help the roots grow, that's what you're using. Gibberellins are involved in stem elongation, not at the terminal apical meristem, but between the nodes of the stem, between where the lateral buds are. So in this case, we have a violet here on the left, and then one that has been exposed to gibberellins, and you can see the flower stems just simply are very long because of the presence of that chemical. The interesting thing is that this particular molecule was discovered by a Japanese scientist when he noticed that some plants that were infected by a fungus that released what turned out to be gibberellins, they would grow up so fast that they would fall over. And so he described it as foolish seedling disease. They're so desperate to grow old and to grow up and to get taller and taller that they flop over on themselves. And I think there's a certain amount of poetry to that particular disease name. Gibberellins are also used in seed germination, and we'll talk a little bit about seed germination. When you have a plant, how do you get the seeds to grow, and so on and so forth. Another important one is abscisic acid. This is a chemical which is released in times of high stress. It leads to seasonal dormancy of the buds, so it helps close the stomata. It does a number of different things, which is basically telling the plant alarm, stress, and of course, as the seasons change and as it gets colder in our climate, you're going to have more and more abscisic acid to try to let the plant know that we need to begin shutting down. Now, interestingly, the word abscission refers to when a plant loses its leaves. As it turns out, abscission is not caused by abscisic acid. It's caused by something else. What's that, you ask? Ethylene. Ethylene actually is the chemical that will lead to fruit ripening. It will also lead to losing of leaves and abscissions. If you think about, in this case, you have a holly leaf without any source of ethylene, and here we have a holly leaf with an apple, a source of ethylene. And what you can see happens is the holly has lost its leaves. So in apples, ripening is a positive feedback sort of thing. So the more ripening happens, the more ethylene that's released. And the more ethylene that's released, if you say have a bag of apples, the more ethylene that's released, the more that will go into other of the apples and cause them to ripen. And the more apples are ripening, the faster the ripening goes. So that leads to that whole, it only takes one bad apple, which is quite true. Only one apple that is overripe, releasing all sorts of ethylene, will cause all of the other apples in that bag to become ripe and overripe and rotten as well. So the message is, of course, when you buy your apples in those plastic bags from the tree farms, maybe take them out of the plastic bags, or at least go through them and look for the rotten apples in your bag. Okay, so we already talked about tropisms. One is phototropism, growing towards something or away from something. Thigmotropism is kind of a fun one. This is how plants basically don't like touching other things. And if you want to do this, get yourself two of the exact same plants and treat them exactly the same way, but just touch one of them a lot. Just kind of blah, blah, blah all over the plant. And you will see that that will have reduced growth compared to the plant that you left the hell alone. Okay, so phototropism, we already mentioned, auxins are involved. The sun is coming in from this direction. The plants, the auxin is traveling to the other side of the stem, causing cell elongation, causing those plants to move towards the light. Gravitropism is another type of tropism. The roots of a plant will go downward according to gravity, and the shoot of the plant, when this particular corn seed is germinating, will grow upward. The next concept I want to introduce is photoperiodism. And essentially, what this means and what this refers to is how and when do plants flower. And what's interesting about this process is that we notice that certain plants will bloom in the summer, other plants will bloom in the fall. And we used to think that this was because the plants in the fall were short day plants and the plants that bloomed in the summer were long day plants. But it actually turns out that the critical length or the critical factor is the length of the night. So actually the summer plants require shorter nights, while the fall plants and the spring plants require longer nights. Of course, when we're talking about the flower, we can kind of look at the main structure of it. That's the main reproductive organ of the plant. You've got flowers, you've got the little sepals, which is where it used to be the bud for the flower before it opened up. The male parts, the stamen composed of the filament and the anther. The anther is where pollen is formed, and there are a number of those. And then the female part here is the carpel, which has the stigma, this sticky material, sticky layer which is attractive and which pollen attaches to. The style, this long projection down, and then the ovary itself. And within the ovary is what's called an ovule. And so in a flowering plant like this, the ovule will form the seed or seeds, and the ovary will form the fruit around the seeds. Of course, there's a whole host of different things that need to be considered when we're looking at pollination. We need to consider whether the plant has both male and female parts, or whether pollen needs to transfer from a male plant to a female plant, or within a flower, within a plant that maybe has both male and female flowers, but they're separate, maybe from the male to the female within the plant. And then, of course, all the different ways that pollination occurs, via wind, via insects, via bats or birds, a number of different ways that pollination can occur. And once the pollen attaches to the stigma, a couple of cells come down and do some fertilization, and the life cycle continues for the plant. Now, once those seeds are formed, of course, they can remain within the fruit and might be attracted to something like a bird who will eat the fruit, and then the seed will remain intact through the entire digestive system, and then the bird will poop it out with a nice pile of fertilizer along with it. Another way seeds can move around is, of course, being attached to dogs, being blown by the wind like the dandelion or maple, variety of different ways for wind dispersal, and the like. When it comes to germination of seeds, it is important that you have all of the different timings right. You have the right temperature, you have enough moisture. If you remember, gibberellic acid was found inside the seeds. A lot of times the water will rinse out and wash out that gibberellic acid, allowing the plant to then grow and thrive and germinate. So the question is, how do I start my own herb garden? Well, usually, especially in our environments, a lot of the herbs are perennial, but many are in fact annual, meaning that they only live their entire life cycle through 1 year. And so the next year you'd have to plant them again or collect the seeds and plant those. Perennial would be a plant where the portion of the plant and rootstock remain and it grows back the next year. But if you are trying to start doing an herb garden, and it doesn't have to be as complicated as a large plot of land, it can be a small piece of property or land, it can be a container garden outside with a number of different plants, number of different herbs that you might want to collect or use for medicinal or culinary purposes. And on top of that, even if you don't have any outside, if you have a window, you can do a container of a particular herb and grow it. In fact, in our neck of the woods, where we live, the climate is so harsh and it takes so long for the plant to grow that we recommend people actually germinate their plants now and begin the process of growth. So if they do have a plot or a pot they want to put it into, it'll be grown up enough so that when the temperature is finally nice enough outside, you can put it outside. Or you grow it in a pot and you can just simply put that pot outside. Or, as I said, if you can put it near a window so that the plant gets enough light, you can grow those things indoors as well. You can grow them hydroponically, just ensuring that you give all the nutrients to the plants. You can also grow them, of course, in soil. A couple of different ways that people often will start is they'll actually put the seeds between pieces of paper towel and water them and moisten them and keep them moist so that eventually the seeds will germinate. Now, it is important to keep an eye on all of this. First of all, if you have a simple pot, it's going to dry out, and you don't want it to dry out with your seed trying to germinate. Even if it's outside, you need to make sure that if it's in a situation where there's a lot of soil, that it can drain successfully, but you also would need to ensure that if you had a pot, that it had a hole in it to kind of drain off some of the rain so that every time it rained, it wouldn't just fill up with a couple of inches of water in your pot and kill your plant. So there's a number of different ways of doing that. You need to keep your eye on if you germinate seeds using the paper towel method, you need to ensure that you watch it because that can very quickly become a moldy mess. Another thing you could do is if you have a clear plastic cup, you can actually put the seeds inside the cup with a moist piece of paper towel, and you can actually watch the germination occur. Another way that a lot of people choose to start their herbs in the spring is to get an egg carton with some soil and just start them off very small and continue as they grow bigger and bigger, putting them into bigger and bigger pots. So finally, as you learn your plants and learn more and more about the plants that you're growing, you will be able to grow better and better plants more successfully and have the information that you need to really grow these herbs well, regardless of whether you use them for culinary purposes, medicinal purposes, or something else. So hopefully that's a helpful introduction to the different ways that we understand plants and how we can make adjustments to their lives in order to help them succeed.